Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's WEConnect International webinar. My name is Maggie Berry. I'm the Executive Director for WEConnect International in Europe, and I'm delighted that you've joined us for the webinar, Developing the Right Plan to Access the UK market. Our presenter today is Joanna Dodd. She's the Managing Director of Rochester PR Group, a WEConnect International certified women-owned business who are specialists in helping international brands to successfully launch in the UK. In today's session, we're going to learn how to get your business messaging right for the UK, how to identify the right stakeholders, and how to develop a communications plan. Joanna will also share her experiences of when companies get it right and why some of them get it wrong. To keep background noise to minimum, I'm asking all participants to be on mute just to keep background noise down. So please do use the chat functionality to ask any questions that you might have, and there'll be time for questions and discussion at the end. Joanna's going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, and the session is being recorded, so you will be able to listen back to it again. So Joanna, a big thank you for presenting for us today, and it is over to you.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Hi, everybody. As Maggie says, my name is Joanna Dodd, and this is the company, Rochester PR Group, based here in London. So I'm just going to run through, Maggie gave you an overview, but I'm just going to run through the topics of what we're going to try and cover for you today. So thank you, Maggie. I won't say that every time you move it. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to us, just so you understand why we know what we're talking about, really, and then also run through, some of you asked some questions before the webinar, so I'm just going to run you through sources of information, how you can find out more information about the UK, and then, as Maggie said, we're going to talk a bit about messaging stakeholders and sort of smartening up your collateral before you even consider the UK, and then sort of going about making a plan. So just this next slide is just really a very brief introduction to us, and I'm not expecting you all to sort of be able to read it all, but I think the important things to take out of it is that we specialise just in market entry. All of our clients are one way or another companies looking at the UK, either trading in the UK or entering the UK market. So that's all that we do, and that's quite unusual for PR companies here in London. We range across a really broad sector of clients. So you'll see there sort of client sectors in no particular order. Tech perhaps is top of our mind at the moment because we've got London Tech Week coming up again. And we help companies really look at everything from very practical one-on-one advice, obviously opening up our network to them, introducing them to the right sort of people, but then all the sort of things you'd expect a PR agency to do in terms of services. So the next slide just really mentions what some of those are. So everything from media relations campaigns, which you'd expect, to copywriting, to putting on events or guerrilla marketing, and then as you'll see when I start talking a bit more, some very practical, we sometimes call it hand holding, which is not being rude, but some very practical advice on what people can do to help their market entry. And these two slides we will take out when we put it up on for you to watch again, but really just reminding people about what PR is. So a lot of people think PR is press relations or a press release. But for us, and the reason why this is interesting to you guys, is it is about your reputation. So what we always say to companies is, if you're not setting your reputation, if you're not managing your reputation, then actually somebody else will be, either because they'll be talking about you in the wrong way, maybe your competitors, or or saying bad things about you. But it's really important to think like a sort of PR person on the way in, and make sure you do all the work. So I put there, what it is all about. It's about maintaining goodwill and mutual understanding, and gaining trust, and talking to publics or stakeholders. And that's why it's so important I think, for market entry companies, because often the issue they face is they don't know exactly who they should be talking to, or they don't know exactly what the market looks like in the UK. So that's where we help them enormously on the way in. And then again, just on the second slide of sort of what PR is, there are loads of different tactics and techniques that you can employ in terms of PR. So it could be media relations, it could be lobbying government here, talking to the government, speaking at conferences, digital, viral, sponsorship. We always work very much on a short-term basis with our clients in terms of market entry, and that's really because they often need to change tack slightly in terms of what they offer or how they offer it. So it can be just launching a product or just launching a company, and then it can be much, much longer term. So in fact, one of the clients that we work with today, I've worked with now for 20 years. So although that was market entry when they first arrived here in the UK, we're still doing a brand building job for them now. So I think on the last bit on that page, just really saying that campaigns can help on various different things. One is, for example, if you're trying to attract employees in the UK, it's a really competitive market, and good PR around your company, why it's interesting, why it's growing, can actually help attract the right sort of people. The other reason, or another reason, that lots of people bring their businesses into the UK is to find funding and investors. And again, that's something that good PR can certainly help around. So as I said, I'm not going to include those when we put this up, because many of you might know it, but I just thought it's worth reminding people who perhaps aren't so familiar with what PR does, is just to give you an introduction. So when we start talking to companies, we really talk about the brand journey that a company will move along as they come into the UK. And this diagram really is about sort of, if you start at the bottom left where maybe you're not known, or known a little bit, we're trying to move you up to become a trusted brand all the time. So we talk about the head and the heart here, which is represented on this diagram. So that the head will be all the facts and the sort of the rational why your company is great or why your brand is great. And then the heart represents very much the emotional side of life. We all know that we do business with companies and with people that we like and admire, and there's a lot more of an emotional connection going on with brands, including business brands. You don't have to be a consumer brand to feel that this is important. So from our perspective, we're always trying to marry what a company does with these sort of two sides of it. And it's because we find that often companies feel that the best way to introduce themselves to a new market is to go very heavy on facts and figures. We have 3 offices around the world, we employ blah, 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 this number of people, we have this many factories, whatever it is. And actually, that's really not creating that closeness, that emotional closeness that consumers, both business consumers and consumers, actually need nowadays. So it's important, I think, for you when you're looking at your business and thinking about the UK, do you have both sides of that covered? Do you feel confident talking about, yes, the very sort of obvious business benefits or consumer benefits, but also that emotional pull? So we would say to you that the things you need to think about as a starting point are for the UK are the same that you already know about your business, where you're based. But it's a really important time to just re-ask yourselves the questions, but in particular in terms of the UK market. And I think probably one of the first key mistakes that people do, or don't do, depending which way you look at it, they don't do enough market research. They don't know well enough who their business is trying to talk to in the UK. So these sort of questions that you would already know really well about your business, ask them again about your business for the UK. Do you know, what are your business objectives? And a lot of people, often they just say, well, we just want to come and try this out, or we test it out. But the more confident you are, the more clear you are on all of these questions, the more likely you are to succeed. So again, if I just for example, question 4, what is your main competition or challenge in the UK? It's often that we hear people say we don't think we have any competition, and we're always surprised, because one of the reasons people come to the UK is it is a brilliant market to come to for loads of different reasons. But because it's a brilliant market to come to, it generally means lots of other people have had exactly the same idea and have come here already. So it's really important to try and find out the information around this, would help you sort of work out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it in the UK. So, you know, you may already have contacts, you may already have some activity that's going to be here in the UK. Perhaps it's a trade show you're going to, or an exhibition. So the first thing we would do is advise you, you know, stand back and have a real hard think about why the UK, you know, why now, and why for your business. And I mentioned on the next slide, I mentioned that some of you had put some questions to us beforehand about particular markets that you're interested in, or sectors, or questions that you had. So I thought I would just start by giving you, obviously these are not going to be applicable to all of you, because you're not all in the same sector, and you're not looking at the same sort of target consumers. But to give you an idea of where there is some really good advice or data or information. So I would say start with our Department for International Trade, who you can reach here in the UK. There's a website link, or you can reach them via, you know, the local embassy in your home territory, as well as your embassy here in the UK, because we liaise a lot with the embassies here in London, and we meet a lot of them, we talk to a lot of them, and they are definitely here looking out for businesses back home for information, for advice. So they have a lot of information at their fingertips, both our embassy, our international trade department, which is trying to help you come into the UK, invest in the UK, as well as your embassy. So I would always say start with them, because they can often be a supplier of some really good information on certain sectors. They may have researched it for somebody else, and they can supply that to you quite easily. Then some of the other things I would suggest you do if you're looking at particular sectors is to look for the UK Trade Association or membership organisation. So, for example, one of you said you were looking or interested in targeting hotels and travel agents. So if you go through to UK Hospitality, which is the big trade association for that industry, you often find on their website, you know, they will give you the size of the market, the way that the way it is set up, how many travel agents they are, where they are regionally. They can be a really good source of starting information for you. Another one of you was more in a sort of plastics manufacturing. So again, you know, I've put a link there to the British Plastics Federation, which is the trade association, with a link to a particular page, which is, you know, find a product supplier. So these are just two examples, but there will be a trade association or a membership organisation for pretty much any trade sector, industry sector you're interested in. And it's a really good place to start, and it's not that difficult to find. To be fair, if you want to do some Googling, you know, you can usually find it by putting UK on the end, and you will get very close to finding information you want. Another route that is useful for you to find background information is to look at shows or exhibitions. So here again is another one related to hotel and travel agency, but there are obviously trade sector shows all the time here in the UK, not just in London, in all the key cities. And they again are a really great source of information particularly in terms of competitors who might already be here or who are exhibiting here, names of people speaking that gives you an idea of who sort of the key people are in the industry. And then linked to that, you can often see by the media sponsors who are around those shows, the media publications. And obviously as PR people, you'd expect that we find this bit incredibly useful. But if you were a retail clients, then, going to one of our leading trade publications like Retail Week, you can find a lot about who else is here, stats, figures, data, what's happening in the market. So I would recommend you try and find your key trade retail publication. Actually, Maggie, can I just go back up to the slide before? Thanks. I'd also look at your competitors. If you know who your competitors are, always a good idea to have a look at what your competitors are up to, because you can often find articles about them. You can find a lot from their websites. You can see what sort of information they're putting out into the market. And then also, if you're looking, somebody else asked what are the booming sectors in the UK. Again, with a little bit of sort of Googling around and having a look around, you can find lots of information, both official and unofficial, in terms of which sectors are performing really well in the UK, what's happening, stats and figures on sort of population growth and targeting different sectors. So that was just a really quick overview for lots of you who asked lots of very different questions. So we couldn't cover them all off, but just to give you an idea that if, as I was saying earlier, if you're looking at the UK, just do a little bit more background, you will feel a lot more confident, a lot more aware of what's going on before you come over to the UK, which you'll probably do as part of your sort of due diligence, looking at the market anyway, before you try and launch in. So why is all of that important? Why is this? Because it provides you with that insight that you really need about the market here, what it wants, what are the right routes to market, and, as I said, what your competitors are saying and doing. And that's really because the routes to market here, so how you will get your product or service through to your end user or customer, is often, in our experience, very different from how it works in other territories. We hear a lot of people say about how, different sectors here are a lot more complicated than they are back home, a lot more layered, a lot more sort of stakeholders and multipliers. So, we had a company come to us once and saying, we want to target the police in the UK. Well, actually, the police works in many, many different ways. And, there are something like 53 different police forces here in the UK. So there isn't, as there was in his home territory, there wasn't one central procurement system for getting through to the police. So it's things like that that you can find out before you come by reading some of those trade publications that I was telling you about, or looking at associations and organisations' websites. Gives you a much better insight into what's happening, and that is really important to find out before you come, or before you put your first offer into the UK, because it is, as I say, very, very often very different from what you expected. So let's say you definitely have decided that the UK market is for you. You're super excited. There's some great opportunities coming, but now I just talk to you about some of the sort of potential hurdles that you might encounter. And the first one is that everyone else is also here and looking equally super excited. So this it sort of visually represents how, yes, you're very different. You're the pumpkin, the rest are the oranges, but actually, to somebody who perhaps doesn't understand your business or doesn't know your business inside out, you pretty much look the same. You're all sort of, orange and slightly round. So the challenge for you now is, how you get known and stand out and get connected really fast, because, as I've mentioned, lots of other people are here already. So it's, whether you're talking B2B or B2C, the UK is a really sophisticated market, which does welcome a lot of international brands into the UK. So you really need to figure out very quickly, who you're trying to target, how you're going to try and target them. So we often say, even our big companies from overseas, when you come to the UK, you're thinking again a bit like a startup, which can be great fun, but can also be quite challenging. So on to the topics in more detail, messaging. So the first thing I'd say about messaging is you you definitely have to tackle looking at your brand and your messaging. So on the next slide, there's a lovely picture of a chameleon who, as you all know, will change his, the color of his skin to adapt to his surroundings. So what we're not saying is that fundamentally, it's not very often that fundamentally you need to change a lot about your brand or your company, but you do need to adapt it for the UK. So you need to find the messages that work here, and then, how you present them. So something that can be super exciting in your home territory maybe has been done here already. And so instead of saying it's super exciting, your messaging might be about how your company is going to, take people on to the next level, rather than you saying, it's new and nobody's done this before. It can make it can resonate wrong if actually we all know we've seen it before. So where this happens a lot, for example, could be in a food and drink brand where you need to get your packaging right for the UK, and that's all part and parcel of your messaging. So it's really important to make sure you've seen that, you've seen what your competitors are doing, how things are packaged. We sometimes we saw a client last year who had something packaged in tin cans for the food industry. Nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that the rest of the market here in the UK, none of their competitors were in tin cans at all. So the image they were giving off before they even got here was probably slightly different from what the UK consumer was used to, which was much more sort of premium packaging, where you could see what the product was and you could see how good it looked, whereas they were turning up with tin cans, which we might perceive to be more a commodity market, the sort of thing we'd find tin tomatoes or tins of baked beans. So sometimes your messaging is really looking at quite different things from just what you say about yourself, but how the market might perceive you. And the reason for saying this is really you have to learn to be quite adaptable. So Charles Darwin, who has always sort of talked about, it's not the strongest of the species nor the most intelligent, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. And we think that's really, really very true of brands here in the UK. You might be the best thing ever, but if you haven't quite adapted your messaging to convince the UK consumer, then you're really not going to do particularly well. The next slide shows you how we think of messaging. So at its simplest, we were always trying to find for our clients, for our brands, one key umbrella message that is really what they hang everything around. And then underlying that, there might be some subsidiary messages. It might be that you're brilliant for, this sector, or you're fantastic for this age group, or it's going to really appeal to millennials, or whatever it might be. And then underneath that are what you would call proof points. So I don't know how many of you have read that book, but, start with the why. This is really very much linking into that. And it's how we present clients when we're talking to the media. Everybody wants to hear why you here, why are you brilliant, not, as I said before, the facts and the figures. So you're really starting much more with an emotional message up top, and it could be your ambition, which is to change the market or to, change the way we think about things. And then you've got a few key messages and your proof points. You try not to overcomplicate this, but it's really important to get this right so that you can tell your sort of story, the story of your company or why you're coming to the UK very clearly and very succinctly. And what we find when we work with clients is that what they end up saying is very different from what they started when they first arrived here and first thought about it. The other thing I would say about messaging for you to think about is to keep everything quite simple. So when we ask journalists, what they hate people saying, it's when everybody over exaggerates how amazing their company is, or so the word unique there in the middle is probably the one that journalists hate the most. But just think about how you describe your brand or your product or your service in a way that's really easy for people to understand. And that's not because you're oversimplifying it. It's because as consumers or as business, if you're trying to sell me a business product, I don't want to have to work too hard to really understand. It's not my job to work incredibly hard to understand you. It's your job to make it really easy for me to know why this product or service is going to be great for my company. So try and keep things relatively simple and clear. So perhaps clear is a better word than simple, but really clear about what you're offering and what you're doing. We were looking at a company the other day coming in from Mexico, and they had a lot of different pages on their website, on LinkedIn, on their social media, none of which really, when I looked at all of them, because that's what we would do, all of us, we all look at each other's LinkedIn profiles and the website. There was no real consistency about what they were saying. So it was actually very confusing to what that company was trying to offer, trying to sell in the UK. And then the other couple of points I'd make is about sort of authenticity. Stay authentic. Don't claim that you're one thing if you're not. I don't know. I think it might be particularly quite a British attitude, but we don't like to think that we're being sort of fooled or people are trying to pull the wool over our eyes. We like people that have a really genuine, authentic story, and particularly, I think, as consumers, but this is also very true of business. So when I said, messaging earlier, your messaging might be your ambitions, but don't say that you're changing the world if actually you're not. Or the other thing we've seen is people claiming certain clients as customers, brands as customers, and then when we say, oh, that's interesting, what did you do with brand X? They go, oh, well, they weren't really actually absolutely a customer. We did an event with them, or we did a trial with them. So don't allow yourself. There's no need. Don't get caught out. If you want to make a good point about you've done a trial with a particular good brand, say it that way. But don't leave it for you put it on your website as a logo, and then you find it's the one thing people pick up and hear and want to talk to you about. So be really authentic. And I think just going back on simplicity, just to sort of reassure you, because we're often working on some very technical products and innovations. People are often worried when we talk about keeping it simple, keeping it clear. But it is true that if you tend to over-explain or give too much information. I was at an event this morning, and people don't take it well when you just bombard them with too much information. So keep it simple. That goes for your goes for your website, goes for everything. Don't overcomplicate it. Say what you've got to say really well, really clearly, why you're relevant to the UK, why you will be loved by UK consumers or UK businesses. But don't feel that you've got to over-embellish it. So that's really sort of messaging for you to think about your business, as I say, going back to the point I made about starting point, think about your business, why it's so great, why the time is right for you to bring it to the UK. And then you need to think about finding the right stakeholders here in the UK. So I just want to show you sort of a little bit of the way that we think about this for clients. And I'd really recommend you do a bit of this work yourselves. So the next diagram sort of is a very simple way that you might start by thinking about your business and who you might need to interact with or engage with in the UK. So, starting sort of at the top right, you might need suppliers for your business here. So they could be, if it's a food product, it could be finding the right raw ingredients here in the UK, how you're going to get them, what pricing are they, what's that going to affect in terms of your food brand, or it could be, a legal supplier that you need, or a bank, which is often one of the big issues that a lot of people talk about in terms of the UK is getting a bank account set up. And then you've got some other things like consumers or your customers, and try and delve into this in as much detail as you possibly can. Sort of what age, where are they? Are they, often people turn up in London and go, it's London, but actually there's some, there's the whole of the rest of the UK to look at. So try and think about your consumers in a lot more detail. and be aware that they could be slightly different from your home territory, because the market might be slightly different here. So bear that in mind. Employees, you may or may not need employees here in the UK. But again, as I said right at the beginning, you know, that's important to know where they might come from. And then looking at around sort of more towards the left, sort of who are going to be the influencers, who are the important people talking about your sector. You know, do you agree with them? Do you like what they have to say? Where else are they talking? Are they promoting one of your likely competitors? Are they pro the industry that you're in? And then round on the left, you know, others, so local communities, depends where you're situated, as to, you know, whether you want to engage very much locally. I've mentioned already industry, trade, professional associations, great way of networking, finding out information. The media, again, as I've said, we believe to be a fantastic opportunity to find out about your industry and who's doing what. And then government and regulatory bodies. Some of this is more important for certain territories or certain sectors. So, you know, Chinese companies are always very interested in sort of having government understanding in countries they go into. But food, for example, you'd need to know who's the regulatory body here for a food brand. And then on the second page, just sort of building on that, you can start to see how you get much more detailed in terms of how you start to split this out a bit. So and then actually behind all of this comes, you know, a lot of detail in terms of obviously the actual stakeholders. So for a client that we work with from the US, you know, we've been building up their stakeholder groups across government, doing some lobbying across different customer user groups, across they're also them in medical, so across the NHS. So all of these sort of individual areas could be very important to your brand. Certainly understanding how the market works is really important for your brand, and understanding who is likely to influence what's going on. So it could be, you know, an activist group or an environmental pressure group has got a lot more sway in this market than perhaps in the home territory, and it would be important to know about them. You might not necessarily need to or want to engage with them, but you certainly want to know what they're saying and what they're doing. So take some time to find these stakeholders, to look at how the market works, look at who's important, and sort of plot them in terms of ones that you think you really need to talk to. How frequently do you need to talk to them? How are you going to keep in touch with them? You know, and really understand what they can add to your business in terms of marketing into the UK. I've just left on the next slide a quote from one of our clients that we help, just really again showing, and you know, it's not just about us, but you know, if you find some good people in the UK, they will be able to help you enormously by using their network. So you know, for us, even though, as I said earlier, you know, we are PR, we do a lot more because of our market entry expertise in terms of helping clients. So for this one, for example, you know, we were able to find them partnerships with some trade shows so they could test out their product, and we also got them the opportunity to work with the Department for International Trade. So for them, even though the work that we were doing was sort of PR focused, actually what we were able to do for them was much more business development, and that I think you would find from a lot of people here in the UK with good connections who know your market well. That generally speaking, we're all very happy to connect people, to put people in touch. So I think that's quite useful to bear in mind. I wouldn't start by saying it, but it's true. Anybody that you work with really well is usually very happy to open up, you know, in effect, their address books for you. So then the next thing I want to talk about is what we've called spruce up your collateral. So if you sort of sat down and you've thought about all these big questions we've posed for you, but you know, why is your business right for the UK? Who are you going to be targeting? Who's going to be important? you then need to really relook at what you've got in terms of collateral that you're going to bring over to the UK, because that's going to be really important in terms of establishing your sort of first impressions. So I think we all know, all of us, that, you know, in this day and age, it's about content, storytelling. You know, we're all sort of social media fans. We're all used to seeing stories one way or another, whether it's, you know, on Instagram or Facebook. And so that is exactly what you're going to be doing too. You're going to be coming to the UK telling a story. And everything that you do and say is going to be somehow contributing or detracting from that. So your website, if we start with that, because that's a classic, you know, what we all do is you go to a meeting, you see somebody, say, oh, I'm just going to have a look at them, and you generally speaking get to one of two things, either their LinkedIn profile or their website first. And there is really very much a difference in terms of how websites look and feel in different countries. And our advice here is always, you know, if you need to, start with a much simpler website for the UK market. You know, if you haven't got loads to tell, if you haven't got masses of information, it's probably better to cut down. I mean, keep obviously your main core site, but have a smaller site that's for the UK. Take the key pages. Don't try and replicate, you know, 50 pages of something which is not going to be relevant because it's going to be about your experience in a different country. We're not probably going to, the UK consumers or whatever, not going to get it. You know, think about your images, your video, the case studies. You know, case studies are obviously in a B2B sense really important, but again, they're not going to be totally relevant at the beginning because they're going to be very much more geared towards what you're already doing in your home territory. You need to make it very relevant to the UK, so that's where some good research could play to your strengths and could help you. You know, instead of saying this is, so for example, we had a client from Finland and just explaining what the Finnish companies were in terms of, you know, how they stacked up, how they compared, you know, to our retail outlets here. So people had a better sense, because if you just say a name to them on a website or in a PowerPoint presentation, they're not sure that they actually understand exactly what you're talking about. The other thing I would do, apart from looking at, you know, the visual and everything like that, is just get somebody who's a native English speaker to have a look at the spelling, the grammar, and even, as I said, the design, because you know, it's amazing how often you can be put off by some website or a LinkedIn profile where the spelling's not right. It just makes everybody sort of step back a bit and go, really? Oh, okay. So it's a really simple thing, but it is amazing how often we see company websites which haven't, you know, haven't gone through a native speaker. So different phrases read and speak differently and sound differently in different languages. So I'd really recommend, when you're ready to start looking at the UK, when you want to engage with people, you know, you've only got that one chance to make that first impression. So make sure it's the right one. Don't let yourself down by having the wrong spelling for something or the wrong grammar, because it can just confuse people, and then they're less likely to engage with you. The other thing I would say is be really consistent in what you're saying, how you're saying it. By consistency, so the next, you'll all recognise the red caps of Coca-Cola. By consistency, we're not saying that you have to be identical, everything on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on, you know, on your website does not have to be absolutely the same. In fact, that would be probably quite boring. But make sure it's consistent. So don't fall into sort of the mistake of having, you know, one thing saying one thing somewhere and one saying something completely different somewhere else. And again, you know, you may be surprised, but we do find this a lot, where it's just not telling the same story. So, you know, somebody could be saying they're reshaping financial information, and somebody else saying, you know, helping businesses enter the 21st century or whatever. It's not actually clear what you're trying to do then. Is it just about financial information you're helping on, or is it something else? So try and be consistent, but as I say, it doesn't have to be identical. You're probably all very familiar with this sort of concept that we all have now about paid, owned, earned, shared media. And this is really just reminding you, when you go and you look at all your assets and think about what you've got and what's going to play out here in the UK, you've got various different things. You've obviously got your website, which you own, and your blog, your content. So that's all great stuff that you control. You can say what you want. The key words, the key messages that you want to get across are all in your control. Obviously, as well as if you're paying to do some advertising. And then, the earned and the shared are not always so much within your control, but making sure that you've got the clear messaging, that you're giving out the right sort of messages, obviously makes that a lot easier. But take a look at all of your sort of marketing collateral. Is it right for the UK market? Is it going to work? And often, obviously, you're going to test it out and see whether it does, but it can work quite differently. So that's sort of the last idea of spruce up your collateral. And then the last thing I think really to think about is making a plan for the UK market. So entering the UK, as I said at the beginning, the UK is a fantastic market for so many different brands and for so many different sort of, whether that's business or consumer. It's got a lot going for it. But in terms of making your plan, you need to think about what resources you can put to it. There's no doubt it takes a lot of resources to enter a new market. And that is obviously money, which is perhaps the first thing people go to, but it is also your time and people. It is going to eat up a lot of time and some money, maybe a lot of money. We've had one client, the next line down, that said, actually, when I came to the UK, I pretty much had to treble everything that I was thinking of. So in my home territory, getting through to the right people was really easy. It was a very flat hierarchy. In the UK, it took me 3 times as long to find the right person. It took me 3 times as much money. It is really, you have to know that you're going to spend some time investing to make it work. So we would always say, set aside that time frame, set the right objectives, the KPIs. I think there are a lot of people who, have a genuinely fantastic product or service and are hoping, and literally I think hoping, with fingers crossed, that the UK market is going to suddenly recognise it. But it is a really competitive market, and it's unlikely to find you. You're going to have to put in effort to make sure that everybody can find you as easily as possible. Now, for you as a business, for women-owned businesses, you probably are the seniors who are buying an engagement. But again, we've seen companies, come a cropper where there's perhaps 2 founders or owners, and one really wants to make the UK market a success. And maybe 6 months in, the other co-founder is feeling a little bit left out or left back in the home territory. So it's really important when you're making a plan to really think about how long are you going to give this, and what are you going to say is success, and when are you going to, if you have to, decide that it's not going to work or pull the plug. And the last thing, and it is pretty obvious, but again, it's perhaps surprising that it doesn't happen that often, is to have that sort of that work in progress, so that you keep reviewing how it's happening, how it's working, what you might need to change. I've sort of alluded to it already, but so many of our clients changed their route to market or the way that they engage with people because they find that it just isn't working, or it's not resonating, or a major competitor has just tipped up in the UK at the same time as them, which they didn't see coming, they couldn't plan for, and then suddenly their main competitor from back home or from another territory is here as well. So I think that is really important to do, to make sure you've got that plan and that you can pivot as they often are. So I think that's where we would sort of leave it in terms of what we've got to say. I think as Maggie explained at the beginning, it's knowing that some of you come from really different markets, whether that's different territories but also different sectors. It's challenging to tell you everything that's very sort of specific to you. But I think if you think of those sort of finding the information and then doing some of those sort of jobs that we were talking about, like getting your messaging right, trying to work out, who you need to engage with in the UK, and then getting your collateral ready for the UK, you will find it, one, good fun, to be honest. It is great fun. A lot of companies, a lot of brands really, really enjoy this. It's definitely challenging, but it is great fun at the same time. And we'll talk to Maggie as well and sort of see if there's anything we can do to help when we put up the video and Maggie shares it round. But really happy to take any questions if you've got any, either specific or generic type questions.
Joanna, thank you so much. You've covered an awful lot in a very short amount of time. So thank you. That's amazing. And please, yes, if you do have any questions for Joanna, please do use the chat function. And I'm keeping an eye open for the questions there. It just keeps the background noise to minimum. I had a couple of questions just from some of the different things that you spoke about. You mentioned right at the very beginning, for example, that it's London Tech Week quite soon. And I don't know, and you've listed some results there. So individual sectors, because one of my questions was going to be coming for an event or a conference and kind of making the most of a trip over is a very good use of time and budget. But and you said that for lots of organisations there will be industry bodies. Is there anything else around? I mean, I'd be thinking, looking at things like on LinkedIn groups, or trying to make sure that ahead of time that you're looking at stuff in the UK market that would be relevant for your industry sector to understand what's happening, or even look back to see what events happened last year and if they're happening again this year. I just wondered if you had any further insight into where they can find out about where businesses could find out about relevant activities that might give them the hook to come over.
Yeah. I think you're right, Maggie. I mean, there are loads of really good shows, exhibitions in loads of different sectors. So, yeah, earlier this year we obviously had the International Food Exhibition, which happens here every 2 years. So if you're a food and drink brand, and we saw quite a lot of brands over from Mexico, for example, Uruguay, Peru. There was pavilions from different countries in the hall. The thing we would say is do probably more than you think up front before you get here. So coming to the actual event is great, and you will learn something. But you could also engage with people before you come here. Fix up to see people, meet people. I'm coming over. Particularly if you say I'm coming over from Mexico or wherever. People are really happy to. Gosh, wow! Well, thanks for coming. Yeah, why don't you stop by and have a conversation with us? There are some events that are great. For example, I talked about IFE, Food and Drink. There's another great one that happens in November called Food Matters Live, which has much more sort of round tables, matchmaking type opportunities. So both events might be brilliant, but one might be slightly better for you. So, for example, I know at the Food Matters Live, because we're going to be there talking about market entry, but there will be sort of retailers there, meet the buyers, that sort of thing. So each trade show or exhibition has a slightly different flavour to it. So, one could be much more just come and look, and another could be much more helpful in terms of introductions. So a lot of shows now have that matchmaking event. But again, you will find them, I think, Maggie, going back to your point, you will find them on some of those, trade associations or industry sectors that you're interested in. It comes up quite easily, what are the big shows. And, give people a ring and find out. But I'd always say, try and engage before you get here, because, if you send an email out now saying I'm going to be over in June, people are more likely to have time in my diary. Whereas if you turn up on the day and go, I'm here, people are already booked up, really.
Yeah, and certainly from a WeConnect perspective, if you are travelling to the UK or the European market, I probably need a little bit more notice than a few weeks, but we can help with introductions. If you're a certified women-owned business, we can certainly within the WeConnect network help with and facilitate introductions to the corporate members here. But we need as much as much notice as possible because they're certainly busy. And Joanna, would this be the same? I know that the one experience that I have of kind of going to big international events is when we take a delegation of women-owned businesses into the US market, and we go to a conference called WeBank. In fact, some of the ladies may have been to WeBank, and I know from my experience, it's almost like the first year you go, it's like you're almost just checking it out and understanding what the lay of the land is, and it's actually in years 2 and 3 when you can really take advantage. And you talked about how things often take longer than you expected, and I just wondered if you could comment anything on maybe it's maybe a bit of a broad question about timeframes, and how there won't be a hard and fast rule, but things will not, I don't imagine, happen over.
No, I think you're right. I think definitely having had the chance to see, a sort of. I mean, it's expensive, as we all know, to come over. It is a big expense and a big commitment, but there's no doubt about it. It does tell, whichever market you're in, that you are really serious about, landing here or trading here. So it definitely helps to be able to, even if it's just drop into conversation. Oh my goodness, yes, that was really impressive when I was at IFE earlier this year. That. To somebody, it just means, oh, right, you are really looking at this market, rather than, you have just
going over for a quick,
just going over a quick trip. Yeah, exactly. The most successful business I think we ever helped was somebody who sort of was looking at the market for about a year, and he came over once a quarter. And every quarter he said to us, right, I would like to meet some more people connected with my industry. I'd like to talk to some journalists. I'd like to, go to a couple of events. And so our job for him was to find what that might be each quarter. So he just built up his knowledge, built up his connections. That meant when he did come over and say, right, now I'm launching, there were a lot of people going, oh, great to see you again, fantastic.
Yeah.
Rather than I've just turned up. So
just right.
Yeah, but I do think, I think everybody recognises it's a big commitment and it can be very expensive. So, the more that you can do sort of from your home territory, the better. But yes, being here and being able to reference that you've been here and make the most of it over social and post your impressions on LinkedIn and, just make sure everyone hears that you are here and interested.
Yeah. And I've just got one other comment to make, and it was about the translations. And whether, please note that there is a difference between British English and American English, and it's sometimes good if you're looking specifically at the UK market to make sure that your collateral is with the British spellings and UK spellings as opposed to American spellings. That would just be my perception. I don't know, Joanna, if you've got any comments on that. I think a bit picky, but I do sometimes think they're just small differences, but
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we try not to be sort of, too picky, but I agree we would always notice if it's American spelling, a Brit, definitely. So, that might be great because it might show that you're trying to be a very international brand, but yes, it probably doesn't show that you particularly, know the UK market. Yeah. It wouldn't really count against you, but I think people would definitely miss it. So if you wanted to make it really clear that the UK was the market you're aiming at, then definitely better doing in British English rather than US. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's a couple of questions that are just in the chat box. Luciano, you've asked about plastic and where you could search. So in fact, that was one of the links that Joanna's included on one of the slides. It's the British Plastics Federation. So when the slides come round, you'll be able to see that, and you'll be able to look into the plastics industry. I have to admit, it's not an industry I know too much about, but I'd be doing some searching to find relevant context there. But Joanna has looked up the British Plastics Federation for you, so that's on the slides. And then Astrid, you've asked, how we connect with some entrepreneurs or different persons into the UK? Do you have some red or something like that? Astrid, I don't know what you mean about do you have some red?
I think it's for the network, isn't it?
Network?
I'm sure that's Spanish for.
Okay, let's have a look.
Yes, I mean to some read like networking or something like that, just for know more about the market in the United Kingdom.
Okay, so in terms of networks and networking events, there are, you'll be delighted to hear, there are loads, absolutely loads. I think particularly in London, there's a mass that you could go to every day of the week. Various different sectors run by chambers, associations, organisations like ours. So depending on what sector you're looking at, there will absolutely be, whether it's meetups or everybody, there will be something for everybody that you could connect into. So you probably do the same thing that I was saying at the beginning, which is to have a look at what sector you're particularly interested in. You will find there's a good network for it. It could be through your embassy over here. It could be a really good starting point where you can reach out to other companies that are already established here and know some other networks. But there are loads. In fact, I'd almost say there's too many
events.
One of the sort of problems, I think, or challenges with some companies is they can spend their time just being incredibly busy going to loads and loads of events and not really finding the right one. But there are lots of entrepreneurs, networks, women, WeConnect obviously is great. There are loads for different sort of sectors or female founders.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially all over the UK, but certainly in and around the London area, there's tons. And I've just put a note with the WeConnect International Europe Conference, which is our flagship event in this region. It's in November. It's the 19th and the 20th of November this year. That's, again, a brilliant event, especially for certified women-owned businesses to come over. We will have matchmaking. There will be loads of great content and loads of great networking. So if you are thinking about the UK or you're ready, certainly I and the team here, we're very happy to share more information about those kind of events. And indeed, if any of you are at WeBank and you want to chat to me while I'm at WeBank about a little bit more about the UK, very happy to sit down and chat about how WeConnect specifically can support if you're looking at this market. And Joanna, there was another question about from Jen about she's got a company that is a service, not a product, and says, do you have any additional advice around bringing a service into the UK market as opposed to a product? But I think a lot of your advice would be relevant for both, whether it's a physical product or a service.
Yeah, it is really. And we're a big service sort of industry ourselves. The UK has a lot of service companies in all sorts of fields and sectors. So yeah, it is the same in many ways. It's whatever the service you're offering, who you're offering it to, why is it relevant, and why is it relevant specifically here in the UK. It's very much the same. It doesn't have to be. Everything I've said is not just about a product, that's for sure. One of our big sectors is services. So we do a lot in financial services, professional services, legal, education. It's the same principles that you need to follow, really.
Adapt. Yeah. Great. So I know that we're just over the hour. Alejandra or Alicia, is there anything that you'd like to say from the team in Mexico, from a WeConnect point over on your side of the world?
Oh, thank you very much, Maggie. Thank you very much for Joanne for all the information. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Super.
You're very welcome.
Great. Okay, well, doesn't look like there's any more questions, but I've got lots of thank yous and great content, and Joanna, it was. So thank you very much for sharing your insight. And please, if you would like to find out more, or if you might like to get a bit more insight, or would like maybe just to have a chat and find out whether maybe Rochester PR and Joanna's team might be able to help your company directly, please do get in touch. Her contact details are there. I'm also very happy to put you in touch with each other if that would be useful. And I wish you all the very best of luck with whatever your plans are, whether that's looking at the UK, whether it's other countries. And I hope that this WeConnect International webinar has been helpful. Joanna, thank you very much for sharing. And if you've got any questions and you need to get in touch, please don't hesitate to get in touch with either myself or Joanna or the team in Mexico as well.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to hear from you. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.